World Cup business, running
Oh,
out of
right.
time now.
Yes. Yes.
Expensive World Cup, 64 teams is what's expected. What not
Well,
after
not what's expected. It's what South America is pushing for. And it was the idea was first floated a few months ago and didn't get a lot of global support, but they haven't given up. And they had a meeting, South American Confederation had a meeting with Infantino in New York last week to try and push this again. Why? It all comes down to 2030, which is that it's the centenary of the World Cup, and South America thought it would get it because it's the centenary. You know, it started Uruguay 1930. Now, obviously, Uruguay, one city, it can't stage a modern World Cup on its own. So a joint bid, Uruguay, Argentina, Paraguay, and they really thought this is the sentimental choice. We will get the 2030 World Cup. But FIFA went a different way. They went Spain, Portugal, and Morocco. As a sop to South America, they said, and this is just a bizarre decision, they said, all right, you can have three games, one in Argentina, one in Uruguay, one in Paraguay. So, you know, the teams there, you know, you'll play one game. So that will be the hosts, the first game of those three hosts against whoever they're drawn against. And then you've got to travel all the way across the Atlantic. Now, the bizarre thing here is the difference in temperature in June, July between like Buenos Aires or Montevideo and Spain, Portugal, Morocco. It can be 30, 35 degrees. It's like walking in a fridge in those places in June, July. I've done it. I've done it too many times than I care to remember. But anyway, from a South American point of view, all this is very, very unsatisfactory. And Paraguay are planning to build a stadium that they don't need for one game. So obviously, the game becomes let's try and get more matches. How can we get more matches though than these three, one in each of the three countries? How can we do it? And they thought, well, there's only one way we can do it. As a special, romantic, fraternal gesture to 100 years of the World Cup for 2030 and for 2030 only, dear FIFA, can we have 64? 64 teams. That would give more of the FIFA membership a chance to participate. It would also give us more games in South America, and it would make the investments that we have to carry out. It will make them financially more viable. So, as I say, so far, this hasn't met with a great deal of support, either from Africa or Asia. But I don't know. As we get closer, will some of those countries think, yeah, we could qualify? That means, you know,
no,
that means
no, we'll come on to Nigeria's, what Nigeria, because that's probably going
Nigeria,
away.
you could probably have
But
200 countries in the World Cup, and Nigeria would find a way to make their qualification difficult.
so you're saying Nigeria, the vast country that is Nigeria, with at least 800 billion people, is the size of Sri Lanka. Come on now, don't be like that. But Tim makes a point though, Miguel, and I wonder if the deciding factor won't be so much the South American countries, but FIFA looking at that and thinking there's a lot of money. There is a lot of money in having a 64 team World Cup.
I think we have to go backwards, and I think we have to go to the period where the hosts were decided, and probably this explains why we don't have the decisions like 20 years ago under Blatter or under Avalanche. Where we're having a new dynamics where there's no vote practically. There's only one contender that goes all the way to the end. And South America, of course, had the better claim emotionally. The last World Cup stage that were in Brazil in 2014, it would be 16 years without World Cup in South America, where they used to have one every 4 years back in the day. But then again, they miscalculated, and Portugal, Spain won. They originally, the first bid was only Portugal and Spain. Then it was Portugal, Spain, and Ukraine, because when the war started, the Spanish Federation thought it would be a good idea to add Ukraine just for fun and to get a couple of emotional votes. Then it was Portugal, Spain, and Morocco because they wanted to have the CFA support on that. And then there was Portugal, Spain, Morocco making a deal with Saudi Arabia. They would support Saudi Arabia unconditionally for 2034 if Saudi Arabia, who now practically owns the game, gave their support in 2030. So that's how South America was beaten. And probably after that, since Infantino has decided he wants a ring to rule them all, like old Soren there, really wanted to give them a sort of a gift in having. It was 3 matches, or the possibility of playing the group stage of those 3 nations would be directly classified as hosts the tournament to be played there. But I think they are doing the silly job of proposing something that has been FIFA's idea all along. I think the most interest in this is not South American federations. I think it's FIFA. I think FIFA needs to be constantly provoking something different. And he knows that in 2034 it will be all about Saudi Arabia. They will own the show. FIFA will just be a sidekick on the event. And this World Cup is already so splashed through the world, having matches being played both in Europe and Africa at the same time. So why not add just a little bit of fun and join the South Americans as well? And I think they probably, the idea of Infantino having a show with matches being played in the morning, in the afternoon, in the night, different time zones at the same time, with different weathers, it all fits in the idea of show business, right? I think it's the idea of having that global tournament, a little bit like UEFA did with the Euros when they had a host city per nation. Basically, nothing has been invented. It's always a recycling of ideas. And that Euros idea was absolutely bonkers back in the day. And I think FIFA thought, okay, we can do this, but at the nation level, not at a city level. Just add as many nations as we can. And if we have to amplify the number of participants, even the better, because those federations will vote on the next FIFA Congress. And of course, we know who will vote for. They will vote for the guy who opened the doors for them to have at least the first World Cup experience, probably with the 64 World Cup. It will be the first time many nations will be playing at a World Cup. And you know that if you play in a World Cup, you don't forget forever the experience. And I think it's all the idea of having everyone pleased. And the game always ends up in the last position regarding uh, arguments for the sake of it. And probably the idea will be just if they could have a World Cup with 200 nations, they would. I think that's the point.
Well, that'll be the future. There's room for it. There's capacity, maybe, certainly on this planet. And I wonder, Atalani, which African nations will be most pleased were the World Cup to expand to 64, even as a one-off. I can imagine Nigeria like, phew, but which others? It's
I feel
true,
like,
though, isn't it? You're laughing, but Nigeria are not going to make the World Cup. The only way they're
well,
going to make the next
I
one
believe we'll get into the new hope that we now have.
Indeed.
But to answer
The
the
lifeline.
original question, an absolute lifeline. We phoned a friend and CAF delivered for us. I feel like it's countries like Lesotho, Zimbabwe that will be the biggest beneficiaries, perhaps in Madagascar. Nigeria, more often than not, we
What,
will sort
what,
ourselves
what
out.
about the
And
East, Atalani? What about
perhaps, yeah,
Kenya,
Kenya, Ethiopia,
Tanzania?
South Sudan, you know, those
Ethiopia.
exactly. Those are the countries that will probably, their ears will be pricking up at the idea of it. But I understand the concept of it being the world's game and having as many countries as possible, cultures, and people being passionate about it. But it starts to feel a bit like a participation prize, which maybe isn't necessarily a bad thing. It is a World Cup at the end of the day, and it's not um, out of reason for the World Cup to grow in size. It started with 13 countries, moved to 16, then 24, then 32, now 48. So 64 seems like the natural progression from there. But as Miguel mentioned, logistically, I feel like it's going to be a nightmare. And I guess to them, it's immaterial, the time zones, the weather, all those sorts of factors. But if I'm playing a game in Argentina on Tuesday and I'm supposed to be in Portugal or Morocco on Friday, my opponents, if they've not had to travel, they have an inherent advantage. And so that somebody is going to complain, and somebody will complain, oh, we've moved from artificial grass to real grass, synthetic pitches. There's so much nuance to it that probably hasn't been considered, because the immediate thing is cheddar. And you mentioned the gradual pivot towards Saudi taking over the game. You look at Saudi, I think it was the PIF that bought Electronic Arts for $55 billion. They are trying to, monetize and take over everything, essentially. So this is perhaps FIFA's fight back, but I think there has to be a limit somewhere. I'm not sure where the limit is, but 64 feels like a lot. Until there's generally enough sufficient footballing nations where there are world-class players in enough of these countries that there will be quality football and you're not saturating the product, I don't think it's necessary. Although it would be cool to say, oh, X African country has made it, X country from here has
Well,
made it.
as Miguel said, there's nothing new under the sun. So they'll probably look at an old Champions League model and make sure that the top teams, the European teams, don't, have to play the sort of qualifying rounds of the World Cup. So they'll come in at the sort of, the old school World Cup
No,
stage where it's more the minnows.
you think. I think what will happen is I'm already prepared to assume that this is going to happen. If the idea has been out there, it probably will be voted and will be accepted, and people will eventually going to embrace it. Like Atalani said, football is in permanent change, and people who moved from the European Cup to Champions League found it odd. People who moved from the Champions League with champions to 32 teams found it odd, and then things keep on happening. Probably the PFI buying EA Sports is a very important thing also because the EA Sports, as you know, has lost the FIFA license to the World Cups, and now they're probably going to get back in, and that's also money they have to recover there. So what I think will happen is if you have 64 teams and you have different nations in different continents, they will do like they did back in the day when there was only one nation, but they do geographical distribution. So if you remember well, for instance, in the World Cup in '82, Italy played in Galicia, while Brazil played in Andalusia, which meant that when they met in the second group stage, actually, they played in Barcelona. So they started the competition in very different areas where weather was very different. The weather from Galicia in the summer is like 22, 23 degrees best, while Brazil was playing at a hot 35, 36. And they found themselves playing at Barcelona, which was probably 28, 29 at the time. So what we're probably going to do is we'll have groups that will only be playing Argentina. We have groups that are only going to be played in Paraguay or in Uruguay. We have groups that are going to be played only in Portugal, in Spain, or in Morocco. And then for the last 16 or whatever formula they're going to get, last 32, they will have the South Americans play at least the first preliminary round, the knockout round in South America, in Africa as well. And then they will probably going to be mixed from the last 16 onwards. So most of the countries will be seeded geographically. Probably is going to happen the same now with the World Cup in 2026, with most of the nations be playing in the future draw in Mexico or in Canada or in different areas of the United States, so they don't have to move along such a huge distance. And I imagine in 2030 that was going to happen the same thing. You have Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, and Brazil all playing in the same area. You have Portugal, Spain, France, and Italy playing in Spain probably. The northern European countries playing in Portugal has a better weather, more connected with the Atlantic weather from the north, and you have the African Asian teams playing in Morocco. I think it will be the solution they're going to find.